I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. Happy New Year! It's January 2nd, and we have a lot to talk about. And before we get into today's episode, I want to wish each of you a very happy and healthy 2024. This is the week that a lot of us make resolutions for the coming year, and I'm hoping that after you hear today's conversation with my guest, Dr. Claire Riley, many of you will resolve to become a donor to the National MS Brain Bank. Resolving to donate brain and tissue to the National MS Brain Bank is a New Year's resolution that goes far beyond the standard eat better and exercise more promises that so many of us make ourselves every year. It's deeply meaningful, profoundly personal, and as Dr. Riley describes it, it's a heroic step in choosing to play an important role in curing MS. But before we get to my conversation with Dr. Claire Riley, there are a few other things that you should know about. Just a few weeks ago, we told you that Merck KGaA, which does business as EMD Serono in the United States and Canada, announced that their Phase 3 clinical trial of evobrutinib had failed to meet its primary endpoints of reducing the annualized relapse rate among people with relapsing remitting MS compared to Aubagio. Evobrutinib is part of a promising new category of disease-modifying therapies called BTK inhibitors. These therapies work by blocking the activity of a specific protein that activates a certain type of immune cell that drives inflammation in MS. And investigators have been excited about this new class of medication because it's the only disease-modifying therapy that's been shown in clinical trials to deplete B cells in the brain. Well, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has placed a partial hold on Genentech's ongoing Phase 3 clinical trial testing fenebrutinib for the treatment of relapsing remitting and primary progressive MS. Fenebrutinib is another BTK inhibitor. This partial hold prevents Genentech from enrolling new participants at U.S. sites involved in their Phase 3 clinical trials for fenebrutinib. And I want to point out that enrollment in 2 of Genentech's 3 Phase 3 clinical trials has already been completed, and recruitment for the 3rd trial is continuing at sites outside the United States. Additionally, study participants in the U.S. who have not completed 70 days of fenebrutinib dosing will stop treatment in all 3 clinical trials. Genentech has indicated that this represents just a small number of participants. Trial participants who have completed 70 days or more of fenebrutinib dosing will continue treatment according to the Phase 3 study protocol. The FDA decided to place this partial hold because 2 study participants developed elevations in their liver enzymes, which is suggestive of drug-induced liver injury. The good news is that these 2 study participants did not develop symptoms of liver damage, and their liver enzyme levels returned to normal after discontinuing treatment with fenebrutinib. I think it's worth noting that Genentech's Phase 3 clinical trials for fenebrutinib have enrolled more than 2,500 participants. The fact that the FDA tapped the brakes after just 2 participants showed signs of a potential risk to their health speaks to the incredibly high level of patient safety that's part of a clinical trial. If you're someone who has thought about participating in a clinical trial but hesitated because you were concerned about safety, this story is worth keeping in mind. In the past, we've reported on clinical trials for BTK inhibitors developed by other pharmaceutical companies that have also been put on hold by the FDA due to similar instances of elevations in liver enzymes, and we'll continue to watch this space and share future news as these studies continue and events evolve. As we welcome a new year, we're continuing to see how so many facets of healthcare innovation, from the research lab to the clinic, are being driven by artificial intelligence, AI has been shown to interpret MRI scans and even predict future MS disease activity with a high degree of accuracy. In the months and years to come, we can expect to see AI continuing to play a role in improving MS treatment. But it's important to remember that AI is only a tool, just like a hammer. A hammer can be used to build homes and cathedrals, and a hammer can also be used as an instrument of terrible destruction. And there may be evidence that some large private insurance companies are already using AI algorithms to deny care that's been recommended by patients' doctors. I'll point out right up front that none of this has been shown to affect people with MS. But the fact that this misguided use of technology is being leveraged to deprive patients of care seems to be part of a disturbing trend, and it's something we should all be cognizant of. 2 weeks ago, a class action lawsuit was filed against health insurer Humana, claiming that the health insurance company has been using an AI algorithm to systematically deny rehabilitation care to seniors enrolled in their Medicare Advantage plan. Last month, a similar class action suit was filed against the United Health Group for using the same AI algorithm to deny medically necessary care. And last June, health insurer Cigna was accused in a lawsuit of having a Cigna-employed physician use AI tools to deny more than 60,000 insurance claims in a single month. All of the insurance companies have denied wrongdoing, and we'll have to keep an eye on how these separate lawsuits are resolved. Meanwhile, it's worth remembering that tools can be used for good and for evil. AI is no exception. What we can also acknowledge is that our society doesn't establish guidelines or pass laws until after a new technology has already been established. We never needed speed limits until the automobile was invented. And we may need speed limits to ensure that artificial intelligence is deployed to benefit society and not cause unnecessary harm. Experts have been researching artificial intelligence for decades, but its emergence as a tool that's being used to rewrite the rules of business and change the way work is done is all relatively new. And while we can always hope for the best, let's be vigilant and keep our eyes open to make sure that this transformational technology isn't hijacked and used for all the wrong reasons. If you'd like to consider doing something truly heroic for all the right reasons, you'll want to listen in a moment when Dr. Claire Riley joins me to share her thoughts on becoming a donor to the National MS Brain Bank. People living with multiple sclerosis may actually hold the key to curing the disease. Donating your brain and spinal cord tissue to MS research will help the scientific community understand what's driving the disease and what's driving disease progression in ways that other research approaches just can't. Joining us today to discuss the research being done at tissue banks and the importance of tissue donation is Dr. Claire Riley. Dr. Riley is a Karen L.K. Miller Associate Professor of Neurology at Columbia University Medical Center and is the co-director of the Columbia University Multiple Sclerosis Center in New York. Dr. Riley is also a co-investigator at the National MS Brain Bank, where she directs the recruitment and characterization of participants in the study. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Riley.
Thank you so much, John. I'm really happy to be here and have this conversation with you.
Well, let's start with a couple of basics. Can you tell us what tissue donation is and how it differs from, say, whole body donation?
Absolutely. So choosing to donate your brain, spinal cord, optic nerves, related tissues to MS research is a targeted anatomical gift for research. Many people decide to become organ donors, for example. You can sign up for it at the DMV. And there can be a misunderstanding that some organs or tissues may also be repurposed for research. This is not the case. In order to donate your tissues to research, there needs to be really an explicit choice and a receiving tissue bank program. Another option is whole body donation, as you mentioned. And in that situation, medical students like like me years ago, or my colleagues or students, have the privilege of learning anatomy through the process of dissection in the anatomy lab. And that's really a whole nother stream and a very, worthy way to send your tissues in your body off. But if you choose to donate your tissue to research, you really need to have a targeted program.
What types of tissue are studied in MS, and how can this kind of work bring us closer to identifying cures?
At the National MS Brain Bank, we initially started out thinking about brain and spinal cord tissue. We've expanded to include optic nerve, meninges, which are the coverings of the brain, and cervical lymph nodes when possible. This is really in response to requests that we've received at the bank as it has been in operation, as well as our growing understanding of multiple sclerosis pathophysiology. One of our goals at the National MS Brain Bank, and a theme I think that you may find or we may have through this conversation, is that we really want to be nimble and responsive to our requesting investigators. So we really want to serve the scientific community.
Tell me about the National MS Brain Bank and how it's different from other tissue banks.
There are several existing brain banks for multiple sclerosis, including some that are also supported by the National MS Society, as we are. We started in 2020, which was a little bit of a hard year to start anything, but we've benefited tremendously from not only the support of the National MS Society, of course, but advice and partnership with those who've been involved with existing tissue banks for MS. And I'll particularly shine a light on John Corboy and his wonderful team at the Rocky Mountain MS Center and Tissue Bank. Our bank is different in a few ways. One is that we seek to enroll people long before the end of life is even in view. We want to follow them prospectively to understand their disease over the coming years. We can enroll people in this prospective study at a distance and follow them remotely. They don't have to be here in New York City or even the surrounding states. We can collect MRI data from clinically acquired scans, as well as cognitive data over our telehealth visits. We use an activity tracker accelerometer every few years for a couple of weeks, and also patient-reported outcomes to really try to get a holistic view of how the disease is impacting the person's life and their level of functioning. Then when that person comes to the end of his or her life, we have a deep understanding of that disease, what we call a deep clinical phenotype. And we can pair that with the pathology that we acquire from the tissue. Many tissue banks for MS have very limited clinical information. You might know that the diagnosis was multiple sclerosis, but you might not know, for example, if the person had progression from onset or had relapsing remitting disease. And you're lucky if you know how old the person was when they passed. And we think that this isn't really adequate to make great conclusions about the disease because, certainly when I think about multiple sclerosis, one of the very striking features of the disease and one that makes it so challenging is its heterogeneity. Some people are profoundly impacted, others minimally so. Why? And I think that having that clinical information is an important part of answering the question. Another thing that makes our bank different is that we have the capabilities of doing molecular profiling. So when tissues come into the bank, when they arrive, a portion of the tissue is frozen in liquid nitrogen, and we can then use advanced techniques to profile these tissues. So we can use new techniques like spatial transcriptomics on these fresh frozen samples. That's a process that's in evolution, but I think that we're lucky that we have access here to some very cutting edge technologies and people with pretty creative scientific minds to employ them. Another thing that's different about our bank is that we do postmortem imaging. So after a short time in fixative, half of the brain travels down to the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, and it undergoes high field imaging at the laboratory of Dr. Daniel Reich, who's one of our PIs on the project. These images are truly stunning. We have the luxury of a long scan time, high field strength. The subject matter is very still, so you don't have the challenges of trying to image the living brain. And so you really do have a very high quality postmortem scan. The last thing I'll say that's unique is that then when histology is done or the slides are cut and stained, we can then target lesions that were seen by the naked eye and those that were invisible to the naked eye, but detected by that 7 Tesla, high field MRI scanner. So we can then link the clinical information, the MRI acquired information with the histology. And the histology, I'll say, is done at Yale in the laboratory of one of our PIs, Dr. David Pitt. The images are then digitized and can be linked, as I said, to the high field MRI, and then also to the clinical information. So we really try to cover all of the aspects that we can to leverage this donation so that it is as high value as it can be.
A moment ago, I heard you acknowledge Dr. Corboy and the Rocky Mountain MS Center and Tissue Bank in Denver. How does the National MS Brain Bank work with existing tissue banks?
Thus far, we've really collaborated extensively with the Rocky Mountain Group, and donors who have registered with their bank have been frequently referred to us near the end of life, since our standard operating procedures allow us to collect tissue from such a broad geographic catchment area, and that can't necessarily be done with the SOPs of the Rocky Mountain Bank. And we also seek to enroll people who are interested in donating and maybe have engaged with other banks that are no longer functioning or accepting donations from such a broad geographic area. And we can enroll them in our prospective study so that we can accomplish our goals of deep clinical phenotyping. And we're very open to working with other banks, but I would say the Rocky Mountain Group is the one that we've worked with the most.
You're currently working on the MS Snapshot study. So what can you tell us about the study?
Thus far, we've been really liberal about accepting donations from essentially all individuals with MS who have approached us or whose families have approached us. But our eventual model is to require enrollment through MS Snapshot as a condition of donating tissue to the bank. And this is so we can capture that clinical information that's so critical to understanding the disease. As I said, MS is so heterogeneous that I think we need that clinical information to really make the tissue donation as valuable as it can be. And with cognition particularly, we can assess this through a telehealth encounter and really understand how MS is impacting a person's cognitive function. MS Snapshot has cognition as one of its cornerstone elements, and it is a prospective study to capture these clinical features and gather treatment information about risk factors, habits, comorbidities, to generate this deep clinical phenotype. Practically, it means having 20 to 30-minute online telehealth visit with a study team member once a year, and paired with that, completing several questionnaires yearly. We also use and send an activity monitor to be worn for 2 weeks every 3 to 5 years to get a sense of how MS is impacting mobility and motion.
Your research at the National MS Brain Bank uses tissue to study aging in MS, specifically how aging may impact cognition. Can you tell us about that work and what you're hoping to better understand?
To some extent, I consider the ability to study cognition and aging in MS to be a luxury and a byproduct of some of the improvements in treatments, extending life expectancy, and being able to think about cognition. So, Columbia has a long history of outstanding scientific work in Alzheimer's disease, particularly. And my co-director of the MS Center, our division chief, Phil Dieger, who is also one of the PIs on the Brain Bank, of course, has been a leader in understanding the role of microglia in both disease states, Alzheimer's and MS. So there's sort of a natural fit that has led me to this place. Certainly also as a clinician caring for people with MS over the better part of 2 decades now, I think that cognitive changes are so important to quality of life. I think they're under-recognized and undervalued. So I want to learn more about the cognitive patterns that can suggest particular pathologies or disease processes in the brain. This is particularly true now that Alzheimer's is becoming a treatable disease. So I think there's a clinical imperative to understand and distinguish between different types of cognitive impairment in a person with a known MS diagnosis. Separately, there are shared risk factors and potentially shared pathophysiologic mechanisms between MS and AD and other diseases of aging. And I'm hopeful that understanding each disease better and their relationship between certainly MS and Alzheimer, for example, may shed some light on their underpinnings and on potential treatments.
The National MS Brain Bank website includes a hero wall. Tell me about that.
One thing that really drew me to medicine in the first place, and to neurology and to multiple sclerosis really, is the importance of that person's story, the narrative. And being able to gather these stories and build this resource, including building the hero wall, has really been tremendously fulfilling. We've received so many personal, poems or artwork, other means of creative expression from next of kin to people who have donated to the bank. And it's such a privilege in my mind to be able to get to know people after they're gone in physical life, but to get to know sort of their legacy. I feel very inspired by this, by so many people who are involved in the project. I find it really humbling. And I encourage people to read the Hero Wall as it grows. We have several profiles that are in the pipeline, and we can really celebrate these amazing people and the gifts that we've received from our donors. The strength and dedication of the relationships also are striking. It's, of course, a testament to the donors themselves for developing these devoted loved ones. And it's been for me such a great privilege to sit with family members, next of kin, and talk through ways that the disease impacted their loved ones over the years. And, the stories of resilience and how people managed even when it was hard. It really inspires me just on a personal level to strive towards more effective treatments and towards cure, whether it's through this project or others that I'm involved in. And I think that the decision to donate your brain, which is such a personal, part of you to research, is a really brave one. And say my cousin James had severe mental illness and very tragically died from suicide last year. One of his wishes was to donate his brain to research in schizophrenia and other forms of mental illness. And his family carried out that wish. And to me, his bravery, even as a young man of 27 years old, and he wasn't able to survive his illness, but he wanted to help other people. It was so moving. And very proud of him and of his family for being able to do that. Certainly it's a different situation, a different set of challenges, but I think seeing people make this decision at whatever point in their disease, I have conversations with people about signing up for a snapshot and thinking about brain bank, and people who are newly diagnosed or 20 or 30 years old, and to even think about what your legacy is going to be. I just find it very amazing that I get to be someone who stewards that gift. And so I take it very seriously, and not to be overly dramatic, but I really consider it a big responsibility. And I found that when I speak with families whose loved ones have donated, that being able to fulfill their loved one's wish and make the donation happen, families are very grateful. It's really been sort of a profound experience for me. I would say once a week or once every couple of weeks, I end up having a conversation with a family, with a next of kin. And it's so satisfying to be able to, assure them that we're doing good work with the tissues. And it's what their family member wanted.
Let's talk about logistics for a moment. Someone may make arrangements to donate their brain to MS research, but following through with that donation can sometimes be stressful for family members when that individual passes. What can be done ahead of time to make that process as easy as possible for family members?
So an important part of the process is to make your family really a part of the plan. And next of kin or co-signers on our intent to donate document and can learn about, the logistics and process for brain donation along with the loved one who intends to donate. We have an autopsy coordinator and a backup who can take on the logistics of organizing it. And so while we can't guarantee absolutely that everything will always work because we have this strict time criteria, being able to do a removal within 24 hours. We put a pre-plan in place. We have the lines of communication open, and we're really poised to act when the time comes. So I think in general, I have had very good feedback that our autopsy coordinator is able to take over and really deal with the logistics, because even when the death is expected, it's still hard. And the last thing you want to be doing is trying to coordinate something that's outside of your comfort zone. So we really take that on, and I think that has worked well.
Are there any costs associated with donating brain and spinal cord tissue to MS research?
There should be no cost to the family. So the National MS Society supports the brain bank. We cover removal, transportation of the tissues, and the remains are returned to the funeral home or to the medical center for burial or cremation or whatever the family has planned. So it's not the case that the brain bank takes care of that, but we return everything, the remains, back to the funeral home or to the medical center. And our autopsy coordinators, take on the logistics and the arrangements. The one thing we need is after the donor has passed, we do get a verbal consent from the next of kin over the phone. And if that person was not already enrolled in the snapshot study, we might ask for some help gathering and sending records, including MRI and on CT and things like that.
Well, someone listening to our conversation may be wondering about becoming a tissue donor themselves. What are the first steps to take if they want to learn more?
In this modern era, I would say the first thing would be to go to our website, msbraindonation.org. We can also be found through the National MS Society Tissue Bank site. And there you'll find information about how to join the snapshot study. You can actually do an online consent there or send an inquiry through the site to one of our coordinators who can call you and talk you through the process. Once you complete enrollment in Snapshot, you'll receive the intent to donate form and can walk through that and sign it with your next of kin.
Dr. Claire Riley, thank you for all you do to advance our understanding of MS and bring us closer to cures. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
It's my pleasure. And I would just add, if there are groups, support groups or communities where I could be of help, I'm more than happy to, take this on the road and have a conversation. I think that keeping the lines of communication open is really critical to making this bank a success. We seek to enroll 5,000 people with multiple sclerosis into our snapshot study, and we need partnership and amplification to make that happen. So I thank you and welcome any conversations and opportunities to share this word.
That's going to wrap up this episode of RealTalk MS. RealTalk MS is powered by the National MS Society, and you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/331. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or a text. And if you have a minute, I hope you'll visit the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the free RealTalk MS app for your iOS or Android smartphone or tablet. It's the best way for us to stay connected. The app will automatically download the latest episode of RealTalk MS. You'll be able to access any of our past episodes. You'll be able to save your favorite episodes. And it's a great way for me to share bonus content with you. The app is free, so I hope you'll download it today. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.